everybody, and welcome to our Social Cognition, Communication and Affect Special Interest Group webinar. We have a series of these webinars, and I'm absolutely delighted to be able to introduce Dr. Avramović, who's going to speak to us today about a topic very close to my heart, which is communication partner training. Before I start, I'd just like to introduce Petra. Petra works with me at the University of Sydney here in Australia. She's an early career researcher and a certified practicing speech pathologist. She has experience in clinical and research settings, excuse me, with a variety of populations, and she has a particular focus on working with people with traumatic brain injury, although her work has covered acquired brain injury more broadly as well. Her PhD research aimed to collaboratively develop a novel digital health communication partner training program with people with traumatic brain injury. Her research in co-designing cognitive communication interventions with key stakeholders has laid the groundwork for the development of our Social Brain Toolkit, which we're very excited about. This is a suite of tools which supports people with acquired brain injury and their communication partners and helps them have positive and successful conversations and also positive social media experiences. So very, very happy to be introducing Petra today. She's going to be talking to us about advancing communication partner training following brain injury, and excitingly, we're talking about the past, the present, and also the future. So thanks, Petra. I'll hand over to you.
Thank you so much, Leanne. Really excited to be able to talk on this topic. And I know we've sort of presented a lot of our work around the Social Brain Toolkit before. So I thought with this talk, I would focus more on thinking about sort of where we came from in terms of communication partner training, where we're at now. How do we ensure that, the things that we know work still continue to work as we start to navigate into the digital space, and also where are we going next? So yeah, just on the next slide, I've got some objectives coming up. So yeah, just a bit of an overview again about communication partner training. How do we transform it into the digital world? I've got a little bit about conversibility, and then talking about some future trends and just some considerations that we need to keep in mind. So moving on to a little bit of a refresher on cognitive communication disorder after brain injury. So we know that a brain injury will result in impairments in memory, attention, executive function, processing, and problem solving, and that these changes then lead to changes in the way that we communicate. So often we'll see people present with impoverished speech, so they might not be initiating or talking as much as they usually do. Confabulatory speech, they might be providing inaccurate information. They might frequently interrupt when you're having a conversation, be quite tangential in their speech, so having trouble staying on topic, sometimes even be disinhibited, and also struggle with their social communication as well. So just setting the scene a little bit there. Moving on to the next slide, we know that cognitive communication impairments don't just affect verbal expression, but they have a significant disruption to people's relationships, work, their social integration as well. We know that people with brain injury often struggle to meet the emotional needs of their partners as well. And this often comes down to the different types of, or the difficulty with their communication styles, especially once it's changed following a brain injury. And I also want to point out that even in digital spaces, people with brain injury can have some difficulty engaging in social media. And we know that that's such a huge part of our lives now as well. It can also lead to cognitive fatigue and emotional reactivity as well. So Just a bit of a list there. You can have a look of, the different impacts that cognitive communication disorder can have on a person. Okay, so moving on to talking about communication partner training. So we know that communication partner training, or CPT, is internationally recognized as best practice for rehabilitating communication or conversations after brain injury. So the INCOG group does recommend in their guidelines CPT as an essential component of rehabilitation. And kind of thinking back to the evolution of communication partner training, it does have its origins in aphasia rehab, where, it was originally used as an environmental intervention to help family members and caregivers support the communication of their loved ones with aphasia. And since then, we've had those principles adapted into being able to support people with brain injury as well. So it's a communication strategy which trains the communication skills of both the person with brain injury and their communication partners. So what role does CPT play in communication rehab? So it's really critical in helping maintain relationships, improving communication function overall to help the person with brain injury regain their independence and social participation as well. One of the keys to having successful implementation or embedding these strategies is making sure that we work within meaningful and real world contexts as well. So that we're not working just within really structured therapy sessions, but that we're working within the contexts that people are actually communicating with. So when it comes to CPT, a person-centered approach is really, really essential, making sure that we're aligning all our goals with genuine and authentic needs of the people that we're working with. So I kind of talked about CPT now in a more broader perspective, but what is it actually? So it's grounded in really strong theoretical foundations. So highlighting the critical role of communication partners in helping individuals with brain injury communicate more effectively. And instead of it focusing on only the impairments of the person with brain injury, CPT really emphasizes the importance of creating a really supportive communication environment that allows their skills to actually shine. So the theoretical sort of backgrounds that CPT is derived from. So I've got a little bit of a list there. So cognitive theory, behavioral and educational theories. I won't go into too much detail, but I do have them here because I think it's really essential that in talking about moving, from more traditional styles of intervention to a digital space, we have to keep these things in mind so that we're not losing these really important foundations as we move through and navigate online spaces. Okay, so on the next slide, so I've got a few examples here of more modern communication partner training interventions. So TBI Express, which was developed by Leanne, and TBI Connect as well. So our colleague Rachel Reedake also led that research. Both strong evidence-based interventions and incorporating those theories that we've just talked about into these programs. So the process of CPT involves a lot of role-playing, modeling, and coaching from the clinician, and some communication strategies that the communication partners are also given are listed on that slide there. So using short, simple sentences, seeking clarification, and trying to engage in more elaborative and collaborative techniques. So working together to get the message across. There are 5 key communication ingredients that are essential to having a meaningful interaction. So that's collaborative intent, so making sure that we're mutual in our participation within a conversation, that there's some cognitive support, so adjusting the way that we communicate to accommodate for any cognitive changes that have since occurred after the brain injury, providing some emotional support as well. So lots of encouraging and positive reinforcement. Making sure that the questioning style is positive as well. So framing questions in a way that supports the conversation and doesn't make the person feel tested or put on the spot, and collaborative turn taking. So trying to have a balanced share of the conversation. So I think TBI Express and TBI Connect are really great examples of pooling all of these things into a communication partner training program, and really enforces how, these ingredients are what have led to these programs showing really strong empirical evidence in that they do work, they do help people. So again, really important things for us to keep in mind as we start to move into a more digital world. So a little bit more of a breakdown on the next slide, showing the difference between TBI Express and TBI Connect. So TBI Express is predominantly an in-person training communication partner program. It's got group component to it as well, and individual treatment formats. TBI Connect has made some key adaptations. So again, there's no group sessions. It has moved into doing more telehealth-based or video conferenced sessions. Again, has really positive results in terms of that communication partner conversation participation and partner support does improve. And some further adaptations have been made since TBI Connect as well, such as being modified for working with people with who are paid support workers as communication partners. So that was by Nicholas Ben. And also looking into some future digital innovations that will enhance accessibility and flexibility, which I'll touch on in a few slides' time as well. As wonderful as these programs are, and we know that they work and have positive results, we do know that there are still some barriers. So some families can struggle with time constraints of actually making it to the appointments, or fitting it within sort of the working day, especially if the communication partner is at work or has other responsibilities such as looking after their kids. Sometimes geographical limitations can be an issue as well, actually making it to the service if it's in person. And this is particularly difficult in rural and remote areas. And we often sort of might see a bit of a drop off in not being able to maintain people through to the end of the program. So need to think about how do we ensure that we've got access to long-term services. This is where we start to bring in digital health as a potential solution to some of these barriers. So digital health has become a bit of a game changer for people with brain injury, and especially in sort of rural and remote areas, with the technology helping overcome some of the biggest barriers to care that I've mentioned before. So travel, the high cost of in-person therapy, and also navigating the availability of speech pathologists that have those specialist skills to work in this field. So digital health really allows people to become more active participants in their own care. So improving their engagement, wanting to stay involved with treatment, and also giving access and communication to healthcare providers. It's also helped on a more global scale in knowing that we've got a big healthcare worker shortage, connecting our healthcare workers to people who need those services has really been facilitated by the introduction of digital health as well. And although it feels like forever ago now, the COVID-19 pandemic definitely sort of accelerated that adoption of telehealth, again, helping prove its effectiveness in maintaining all of those rehabilitation services, even while we were in lockdown. So I think it's really important for us to sort of take all those lessons learned and keep moving forward now. So one way to do that and to make sure that we are developing and creating interventions that are truly meaningful to the people that we're working with is doing this through co-design or participatory action research, PAR. So this focuses on working with people with lived experience. So I guess in our case, people with cognitive communication disorders after brain injury, their family members, clinicians, sometimes even sort of, software developers, anyone that we can get on board to really help us develop and refine the tools that we're working with in a way that is authentic to the stakeholders that are our end users. So when it comes to co-design, there are sort of several key principles that do underpin this approach. One concept being ownership and power. So ensuring that the people that we work with aren't just passive recipients, but they're actually active in shaping their own care. And another idea is about creating those equal and reciprocal relationships as well. So this means that as healthcare professionals and researchers, we're collaborating equally with people with brain injuries and their family members as partners and sharing that knowledge and decision making as we go along. In our work with the, doing those further adaptations of TBI Connect, we decided to use the IDEAS framework. So IDEAS standing for Integrate, Design, Assess, and Share. It consists of 4 key phases that I've just described there, but our work mostly focused on the first 3. The last phase is the sharing phase, which I guess we're doing now with publications and webinars like this one as well. So how did we apply the IDEAS framework? So with the integrate phase, for us, this involved gathering insights from conducting a systematic review, looking at cognitive and behavioural digital health interventions in brain injury in general. And we also conducted interviews with stakeholders. So wanting to understand, well, what was the experience really like for them? What did they want out of a communication partner training program? And then we combined these insights with the existing intervention, so TBI Connect and TBI Express as well, knowing what are the key ingredients and starting to pull all of these things together into the design phase. So once we were in the design phase, we started to analyze all the tasks, and we did a big task analysis, trying to work out what can be delivered in person, so synchronously or at the same time, and what can be delivered asynchronously. So what can the people with brain injuries and their family members do on their own in their own time? So we did this in an iterative way. So we kept going back and forth with our key stakeholders that we had initially interviewed and continued asking, making their opinions and their thoughts to make sure that we were really capturing what their needs were. So a little bit of a roadmap depicted there. So the last step in our sort of assess phase, sorry, Liz is very kindly doing my slides for me. Had some technical issues this morning. Our last phase there is our assess phase. So this is where we actually evaluated our prototype of that next iteration of TBI Connect. We did a proof of concept study and a pilot study to see whether this actually might work. So I'll talk a little bit about those results a little bit later in a few slides' time. I talked a little bit about who our stakeholders were and who our co-designers are. So they were people with brain injury, speech pathologists. We had other allied health professionals, so occupational therapists, a psychologist and a physiotherapist, paid support workers, and family members of people with brain injury as well. So these were all people that formed part of our team. In doing co-design, there were some key things that we had to tailor to make sure that we can support people with cognitive communication disorder through this process. We wanted to make sure that the co-design process itself was as accessible and inclusive as possible. So I've got a few examples here of how we went through and did this all the way, from providing really informed consent. So making sure that our co-designers fully understood the consent process. We would highlight key information in the participant information statements and make sure that there was a support of a trusted person if needed. There was lots of transparency in the way that we use their data as well. So they were aware exactly of how their data, especially online data, when we were doing the interviews and recording the sessions, was restored and used. We were conscious of any emotional support and fatigue monitoring as well, especially throughout the interview phases. So recognizing that online environments can increase fatigue, we had really clear procedures in place to make sure that if support was needed, we can provide that. We also had a number of strategies within sort of our methodology as well to make sure that the people that we were working with, our co-designers, felt comfortable in the online sessions. So this included some pre-session rapport building, emails or introductions before the interviews even happened to help them feel a little bit more at ease. Making sure as communicators ourselves that we were practicing nonverbal communication. So we were looking at the camera to emulate eye contact as opposed to looking at the screen. We made sure that we gave extra time for introductions and small talk. Again, some of that, creating more of that comfortable, engaging environment. During our interviews, we had multimodal communication support. So lots of audio, visual, written and verbal cues to help understand and help enhance understanding. And we didn't just do this with people with cognitive communication disorder, but all our co-designers definitely found this process really helpful. And then we also, after our interview sessions, we would sort of send through a bit of a summarized, some dot points around what we talked about, what were the key points, and provided our co-designers with opportunities to comment on whether that actually encapsulated or captured what they had meant to say, if they had anything they wanted to change or add. Something we were also conscious about, because it was a longer study and we we're sort of coming back and forth to our co-designers, was minimizing the burden. So our co-designers really had that co-thinker role. This gave them the opportunity to give really valuable input, but also ensured that they weren't overwhelmed with a project that went on for very many years, what it felt like to me, as it was my PhD project. It definitely felt like it was never ending at points. The other thing was keeping this in mind, especially during the COVID-19 pandemic. So our research definitely overlapped with a lot of restrictions and lockdowns and a lot of other things going on in people's lives. So we didn't want to add any further barriers to their participation and involvement in this research. So all of this led to the development of conversability. So this is just a little bit of a quick summary slide. So we ended up with 7 video conference sessions. So these are sessions that the person with brain injury, their communication partner, and speech pathologist attend. And then 7 self-guided online modules that complement each of the weekly sessions. So the online modules were completed by the person with brain injury and their communication partner at their own time and pace. Listed there are the 7 titles of each of the modules. So you can see that we're really trying to use some of the wording that we were collected as part of our interviews to reflect the voices of our co-designers as well. So we all have some problems with conversation. We can keep improving our conversations, match your conversation to the situation, working together to get the message across, talking like teammates. How do we keep the conversation going and making sure your conversation is organized? As part of our sort of key digital features that came up and were introduced in conversability were the option for people completing conversability or completing the CPT program was to record practice conversations that they can actually upload into conversability into the platform itself. The speech pathologist can then go in and have a look at that practice conversation and provide feedback that was actually time-stamped. So they would be watching the video, they would write some points of feedback or comments and that were time-stamped, and then the participants were able to see what that feedback was ahead of the session, the weekly video conference session. We also incorporated within the modules short 1 to 2 minute videos or animations that taught those new ideas around how do we communicate more effectively. And we also made sure that some of the videos were interactive as well. This was something that came up from our co-designers. They wanted things to keep them engaged. So in this screenshot example, the instruction is that every time the woman with red hair talks, you'd press the red hair button, and every time the woman with blonde hair talks, you'd press the blonde hair button. At the end, you get a bit of a summary of how much each person talked, and then the person with brain injury and the communication partner need to evaluate whether it was a balanced conversation or not. So with conversability, we really wanted to make sure that there was flexibility in the way that people can approach their CPT program and their practice, and that there were options of the synchronous and asynchronous learning as well. Moving on to the next slide, which isn't as pretty and colourful as the ones so far, but I wanted to share this, the next 3 slides around how did we actually keep the ingredients. So if you remember, sort of I started talking about the theoretical foundations earlier on in this talk. And you can see how we made sure that as we went through from TBI Express to TBI Connect to conversability, we made sure that we can keep ticking those foundations off. Something that we haven't carried over yet, and maybe it's something that we'll explore in the future, is the group process. So this is a key feature of TBI Express, and we know how effective groups are when working on communication after brain injury. So again, it's got a cross in there at the moment, but hopefully down the track we can add some ticks in there as well. Moving on to the next slide. I won't go through all of these in detail, but here we've got some more of those examples of how we carried through what the clinician actually did. So from TBI Express to TBI Connect, and then we needed to separate it out in conversibility from synchronous to asynchronous. So there were more things, obviously, that the clinician was doing in the synchronous sessions because they were there online with the person with brain injury and their family member. But we gave people with brain injury and their family members a lot of things that they could do on their own and continue to practice and have access to that practice when they weren't, in the session with the speech pathologist as well. So even though the speech pathologist, there's some crosses there where the speech pathologist isn't doing the work, we handed over some of that autonomy to the person with brain injury and their family member or their communication partner. In the last slide, you can see some more of those treatment ingredients that we talked about a little bit earlier as well. So lots of practice. How do we sort of repair conversations? What sort of feedback do we get? So again, carrying that all the way through. Okay, so moving on to talking a little bit around the findings of our pilot study. So we had 10 dyads, so a person with brain injury and their communication partner. We had some family members, but we also had 6 support workers actually take part of this study as the communication partners, sorry. So the pilot study looking at conversibility focused on evaluating its impact on conversation skills and quality of life for people with brain injury and their communication partners as well. So since the study had a pretty small sample size, so only 10, we measured effect sizes rather than statistical significance. A key finding was that we did see that improvements were actually greater at 3 months follow-up than immediately post the intervention. And this is a pattern that we also saw in our proof of concept study. So we only had 3 dyads in that study. So this starts to suggest that maybe conversational skills do continue to develop even after the intervention ends. With our participants, they all had chronic TBI, so the average time post-injury was 13 years. So we sort of started to hypothesize that neurological recovery was very unlikely to explain these improvements that were happening at 3 months post-intervention as well. Some potential things that we thought could be contributing to these results is that maybe the participants needed that additional time to consolidate their learning through all the strategies that they had learned through their communication partner training program. And they had also retained access to the online platform as well. So although we didn't collect this data, they're, we're hypothesizing that they may have revisited some of the self-guided modules, looked back at some of their video conferencing sessions, or even continued to do some of the practice tasks, continuing to reinforce those communication skills over time. This was, I guess, really helpful for us to learn and know because it highlights that there is potential for long-term skill maintenance. And knowing that with existing research that TBI rehabilitation really should be happening, throughout the whole lifespan rather than just concentrating in one recovery phase, or especially typically we see that happen in the earlier recovery phases. So it gives us sort of hope that maybe digital platforms like Conversibility can continue to offer ongoing access to training materials that allow people to continue to refine their skills and their communication needs, especially as they continue to evolve with different life events and needs as well. And interestingly there, just on the quality of life as well, we did continue to see really similar improvements, and those improvements follow the same pattern as the communication improvements or conversation improvements, where we're seeing greater gains at follow-up compared to immediately post-intervention. So again, reinforcing the idea that communication difficulties after brain injury definitely have that profound effect on a person's relationship and their social well-being as well. So how does this all sort of start to now compare? So we've got a little bit of sort of comparisons now between Conversability and TBI Connect, especially since Conversability was adapted from TBI Express and TBI Connect. It's really important for us to think about whether its transition into the online environment affected its efficacy. So when we compared the effect sizes and looking at that, we used the same measures across all three studies. We were able to compare the treatment effects of these three programs. So two key differences between Conversability and TBI Connect. So in Conversability, we were seeing greater improvement in communication partner skills and in structured conversations. And TBI Connect, we saw more improvements in more casual conversations. In the next slide, I've got a little bit more of a breakdown of some of the key similarities and differences. So in terms of the similarities between Conversability and TBI Connect, the impact on the level of participation in conversation by the person with brain injury were actually really, really similar. But we did have a few key differences emerge. So the first one being greater improvement in communication partner skills. So the participants in Conversability had stronger gains in providing conversational support to the person with brain injury. Again, thinking about the possibility of ongoing access to the online platform, maybe encouraging ongoing engagement with the treatment materials. The other thing to keep in mind as well is that we did have a large number of paid support workers, and typically conversations between a paid support worker and a person with brain injury is more likely to be more structured than casual. In Conversability, we saw again larger gains in conversation participation at follow-up. So again, maybe speaking to some of that ongoing access to intervention resources. And there was a greater improvement in those structured conversations compared to the casual conversations. So in TBI Connect, we saw more improvement in casual conversations, where the makeup of those participants were more of those roles between family members or spouses. And in Conversability, we saw improvement in conversations that were structured and goal-driven. So again, reflecting a little bit around those paid support workers. So the results that we saw definitely do echo some of the results that Nick Ben had found in his study, focusing specifically on paid support workers, where they were more likely to engage in task-orientated and purposeful conversations. So as a genre, it makes sense that we were seeing greater improvements here. Okay, so thinking about the clinical implications, as we move towards integrating these digital health solutions into CPT, it's really important for us to keep in mind what the clinical implications are for speech pathologists, other healthcare providers, and even the people that are receiving or taking part in these interventions. So digital communication partner training programs do offer that flexibility and increase access to as an alternative to traditional face-to-face therapy. For individuals with brain injury and their communication partners, this could mean that they have greater opportunities for rehabilitation, particularly for those in rural and remote areas, or those that face challenges attending sessions in person. For speech pathologists, this also means that that we need to shift and adapt our service delivery models to incorporate more asynchronous components, such as self-paced learning modules, video feedback, and clinician-guided online sessions as well. So hopefully by embracing these tools, clinicians can extend their reach, allowing more individuals to receive communication partner training without necessarily increasing their direct clinical hours that we know that our clinicians are very short on. With wanting to make sure that we've got successful implementation of digital communication partner training programs, we need to make sure that we can reduce barriers to access. So not all clients may have the necessary digital literacy, technology, or internet access to fully engage with these programs. So to address this, I think it's really important for speech pathology services to include structured training to help the people that they work with become more familiar with digital platforms from the beginning or even before treatment starts. Another important consideration is clinical workflow and funding models as well. So many digital health interventions do require indirect clinician time, such as reviewing client progress or providing feedback asynchronously or even moderating discussions online as well. So in this regard, I think policy changes are really important to make sure that the funding models recognize the support that is essential but often overlooked as an aspect of digital healthcare. So hopefully by addressing some of these challenges and improving accessibility, providing support for digital literacy training and advocating for sustainable funding, hopefully we can move towards bridging the gap between innovation and actual real world implementation. So with the goal of making digital CPT programs accessible and effective for whoever may need them. Thinking about the future, it's also really important for us to identify some of how do we start to sort of move forward. So translating communication partner training programs into multiple languages would be a major step towards expanding international reach, but also supporting culturally and linguistically diverse populations within our own communities. And also thinking about technological advances that just keep coming and they don't stop coming. Digital CPT programs can definitely continue to incorporate more automated data collection, possibly clinical decision-making support. Some real-time transcription would be really, really cool to have as well, and save a lot of time, and also think about AI-driven feedback and especially on non-verbal communication as well. So with emerging fields like precision medicine, this really offers us exciting opportunities to try to start to tailor interventions using AI and algorithms to create more personalized and adaptive treatment approaches. So what's next for us in terms of future research directions? We've got a few directions that we're, I think, simultaneously trying to head into. But I think one priority for us as a team is conducting a larger randomized controlled trial to start to compare digital communication partner training programs to no treatment. And this will then provide us with that stronger evidence, knowing that they're truly effective. Additionally, looking at introducing digital CPT programs like conversibility into clinical training for student speech pathologists. So not only is this increasing access to clinicians working with people with brain injuries, but it's also starting to train our future workforce as well in their ability to deliver digital health services. So hopefully these future directions can, highlight some of that enormous potential of digital health interventions and the role that it has in transforming communication rehabilitation. So hopefully, if we continue to innovate, expand the access to these programs and start, continue to leverage cutting edge technology, digital health programs like conversibility can help us continue to improve communication outcomes and hopefully the quality of life for people with brain injury and their communication partners as well. On my next slide, I've got a few examples of, I've mentioned AI in my previous slides, and these are a few examples of some conversational AI agents that are just exploding onto the market. And I could just keep adding more and more and more screenshots to this page. So there's been there has definitely been an explosion of AI in healthcare, and with it, sort of lots of groundbreaking tools, for clinical decision making, automated feedback, helping people sort of practice their conversation skills, practice job interviews, but we're lagging a little bit with our research. So it's definitely on the rise. So in the next slide, again, I've pulled a few screen grabs of some papers. There are many more out there. We're catching up, but I guess the point that I want to make that as we continue to advance into the digital space, despite already sort of having lots of these tools already available, I think it's really important that we remain really cautious and continue to be evidence driven, so that we make sure that the core treatments, treatment ingredients, and the clinical effectiveness is actually maintained as we start to use these tools with our clients. So while AI and sort of more automated processes can enhance intervention delivery, I really think they should complement, not always replace, those foundational principles of evidence-based therapy. On my next slide, I've got a few examples as well of some of the work happening in the virtual reality space as well. So again, really similar trends as what we're seeing with AI. And it's offering us lots of exciting opportunities for more immersive rehabilitation and skill development. And similarly, research is still working on sort of validating its long-term effectiveness. So just like with AI, again, ensuring that these technologies are integrated more thoughtfully, preserving those core treatment principles and making sure that the interventions are effective. So yeah, as these digital tools continue to evolve, I think our focus again should remain on the clinical outcomes and the client needs, rather than just adopting the technology because it's there. And particularly when we're working with vulnerable populations, such as people with communication disability after brain injury. And to start to wrap it all up, as excited as I am about digital health, I do sort of want to caution that, digital health is something that we do need to take on a lot of these considerations through and be cautious as clinicians and researchers. And on the flip side, I know that it's not just an alternative. It is an opportunity to start to redefine the future of rehabilitation for people with brain injury and communication disorders. So if we can embrace some of this innovation and start to break down barriers to access, continue to empower people with brain injury and their family members and supporters, work towards creating more inclusive and personalized approaches to therapy. I think we're going to be on the right track. So the evidence is definitely clear. So the technology does have the power to transform communication recovery, but now it's up to us as a big team of researchers, clinicians, people with lived experience, and policymakers to start to turn this potential into reality. So the future of communication partner training is definitely here. We're living in it. And I just sort of want to end with saying, let's make it accessible to all those who need it. I've got a little slide here at the end, just with any contact details. I'm happy for you to reach out with any questions or things that come up. Thank you.
Thank you, Petra. What a brilliant presentation. I'm obviously quite aware of all the work that you're doing, but it's always lovely just to see it wrapped up and tied up with a bow in such an erudite and beautifully presented presentation. So I actually have a couple of questions for you. I was sitting here just, it always makes you think about these things for a long time, but just hearing somebody else talk about it triggers more thoughts. And so I've got a couple of questions for you. One was just going back to that, what is the black box that is communication partner training, and, the ingredients, and, you did that lovely work where you compared the progression across the different programs from TBI Express to TBI Connect to conversibility. But I was just wondering about, I suppose, any future plans or any, how else can we really unpick what are the active ingredients? What are the things that we're doing in CPT that seems to be a powerful ingredient?
Yeah, I think that's a really good question, Leanne. And I know that we've got sort of a big array of things that we kind of throw out there, and we hope, something's working. So Dr. Nick Ben from City University in London, I know that he's doing a lot of work now trying to pull apart what is CPT and what are the ingredients that work. So I know he's got a big focus on TBI Express and TBI Connect, and he's using models such as the RTSS framework. And I think we've got our colleague as well, Naomi, looking at adapting communication partner training for people with dementia as well. And she's used things like the behavior change wheel. No, the behavior change, to look at those things as well. So definitely some amazing researchers that are really getting into the nitty-gritty. We've just started doing that with conversibility as well with an honours student, Pearl. So we know that, we've adapted conversibility now into this digital space, but where did those ingredients end up? We've also, our plan is to sort of now pull apart conversibility as a program and then go back and look at some of the sessions from our pilot study and see, well, what actually happened in those sessions? What were the ingredients that the clinicians facilitated and supported to support the communication of the people with brain injury and their communication partners? So I think there's still some work to be done in that space for us to know what's really working.
Yeah, it's really interesting because a lot of it, certainly when we developed TBI Express, and that was with Professor Emma Power and Dr. Rachel Reedake, and a lot of that was drawn from, as you noted, theoretical writing from people like Dr. Mark Ilvasaka, and that really informed how we thought about putting tasks together. But we, at that point, which was quite a few years ago now, in 2010, I think that was, we didn't have the RTSS. It wasn't as prominent, and the behaviour change taxonomy. So it's really fascinating for me to have that lens placed on something that we've done from a long time ago. And I think from my perspective, it's going to help us design more effective treatments in the future if we can really pin down, actually, that was the thing that, when a clinician did this, the person did that, and this seemed to have an impact. So yeah, I think it's great that Pearl is having a look at ability for us, and yeah, it's just it's an interesting question about how and why do we do the treatment that we do, because I don't think we've gone down to that really great level before.
Yeah, and I
question,
think it will, oh, sorry, I was just going to add, I think it will also help with us knowing with our manuals and our instructions, to the clinicians as well, how specific do we have to be in terms of providing them with that support as well. I know we've had other students look at, as a project, another honours student look at conversibility and the student's perspective of it, and they often felt like they didn't get enough support, so they didn't really know even what to do within the sessions in regards to what were the treatment components. So how much support do we give in terms of that training as well with these programs?
That was exactly where I was heading. So just in terms of how do we adapt what we've done for students, because we've really designed these treatment programs for practicing clinicians. And in terms of the stakeholders in the co-design process, we didn't explicitly include students in that process. So what do you think we'll be doing in the future to facilitate this sort of training into student, clinical education? What needs
I
to
think
happen?
it is going through a co-design process with students, definitely. As I mentioned, one of our honours students, Ashna, who just finished up and is sort of working and finalising her paper and publication now to submit it for publication. Some of her findings were really around the students feeling like they needed more support. So I feel like the natural next step is actually getting the students on board and helping us adapt and refine the materials that we do have into something that they feel like will be a little bit more supported and feel more confident in delivering communication partner training.
Yeah, it'd be a great thing, wouldn't it, if we introduced this early in their candidature, and perhaps had the fourth year speech pathologists being the ones that were helping with the training of second years or something like that. I think there's ways you could embed learning about CPT into a clinical assessment that we don't traditionally do. Yeah, because I think that is the next step, is getting people feeling confident with doing this, and starting with students is a great place to start.
Absolutely.
And just the last question I had for you was just about the training itself when you were doing conversibility, and you talked about the gains being maintained to a greater extent with those that had potentially were using the program more frequently in between their sessions, because they had access to everything online, didn't they, in between times. I'm just wondering if you've got a sense of how important that self-directed practice and autonomy was. Did you get the impression while you were doing the pilot study that was a significant factor for at least some of the participants, and people with brain injury and also their family members?
I can sort of reflect on some of the participants that I worked with, and I know like they actually really enjoyed doing the modules and sitting down together and working through it and sort of having some of that time that they would set aside. As a clinician, when you ask clients to do some practice at home, often they'll sort of come back and say, I didn't get around to doing it. So I didn't always have high hopes during the pilot study, but I was actually quite surprised with how many people did follow through with completing those modules. And I know there's some sort of bias within that as well, as that, they're participants signing up to a study. So there's already some of that motivating nature.
Yeah.
We didn't really sort of collect data from the back end to see if they were going back, once we'd wrapped up the study, if they continued to have access to the platform, but we didn't really collect the data to see if they were continuing to go back. I think it would have been great if we had maybe included some interviews at the end of that 3-month mark as well, just to feel like we can really get a true sense of how they felt about the program, what impact it had for them, but also how were they using it? How were they putting things into practice in everyday life and in regards to the strategies that they worked with. So yeah, if I had a little time machine, maybe we could have gone back
Yeah,
and
we
done
go
that.
back.
But
Look, you can't do it all, and what you've
no.
done is truly remarkable. Really, it was the next frontier really in communication partner training. I can remember we did interview some people 6 months after we did the TBI Express program, for example, and we asked some of those questions, and my memory is that many of them would have benefited or wanted booster sessions. They said, the training was fantastic. I loved doing it. They'd certainly had less effortful and more enjoyable conversations at 6 months compared to at post. So we saw that similar pattern of continuing recovery even after the training had finished. And I think that is that habituating new conversational skills, and just that they just become automatic, which is what we're wanting.
Yeah.
But I think they all said would have been so great to have a booster session, to have another little burst of treatment or another couple more contacts with the clinician. We'd love to keep going with it.
Yeah.
So I wonder whether Conversibility might offer that opportunity, because there's so much self-directed content in the program, and that is the new thing. So, there's always something to do in future research.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think even in our sort of during our design phase, and I didn't sort of add it in the presentation earlier, but we had 7 sessions to complement the 7 modules. But during that design phase and getting the feedback from our co-designers, they actually wanted more sessions. So we ended up adding a few more sessions where they got to consolidate those skills that they learnt during those first 7 weeks. So it was interesting to hear that people actually wanted more.
Yeah, I think they do.
Yeah.
I think they figure out, particularly when they start to get some success, like how thing is it to suddenly be able to have a natural, positive conversation with somebody that you've been living with potentially for 13 years. That was the median time post-injury. So I think some, of course, they're wanting to do that more often, and have those enjoyable, warm interactions with their family member. So, it's a huge improvement. The Conversibility program, I think, is another big jump for us, and I'm just so excited about where this is heading in the future. And I'm really grateful to you, Petra, for giving us this webinar and helping us think about all the potential applications and where we're heading in the future. And it is very exciting, I think. So I think we will leave it there for today. Thank you for being here. Thank you to Jennifer Wiley for helping us from the IBIA Secretariat. We're very grateful to IBIA for supporting anything that we're doing with social cognition, communication and affect. We have a wonderful special interest group. It is on the IBIA website if you would like to join us, we're a very vibrant and fun group, I think. The SIG, we called ourselves the soccer group. So do look us up and join if you're not a member already. And yeah, we'll look forward to seeing you next time at our next SOCCA.Avramović webinar. Thanks a lot, Petra.
Thanks, everybody.
Okay.
See you in March.
See you in March. It's not that far off.
All right. Thanks, everybody. Bye.
Thanks, Jennifer. See ya. Bye.